During the war between Ukraine and Russia, we have witnessed countless tank battles. These clashes are not just displays of military power, but also reveal critical strategic moves that can shape the course of the war. In this video, we will take a closer look at some of the most striking recent tank engagements and examine the tactics used on the battlefield in detail. Two Russian tanks advance in the field while a Ukrainian Leopard tank observes them from a distance. Once it finds an advantageous firing position, it stops and takes aim. The first shot is a direct hit. Moments later, the second round finds its mark too, and the attack is stopped. When the crew learns that two Russian tanks are advancing a few kilometers away, they move to intercept without hesitation. When the tank comes within range, there's about 1.5 kilometers between them and the enemy. They aim the gun and fire. The accurate shot forces the enemy to pull back. A truly rare moment, a real tank duel. In such moments, courage and skill usually come to the forefront. Ukrainian tanks setting unexpected ambushes for their enemy. Two Ukrainian tanks take position with the help of a drone. They wait for the Russian tanks to enter their firing line. The first shot is fired, then comes the second. The third shell also finds its target. The tank starts to burn. One enemy soldier survives and manages to escape. The Russian tank was advancing but soon became defenseless. The Ukrainian tank waited for the right moment, struck, and destroyed the Russian tank, forcing the enemy to retreat. Russian forces fired an anti-tank missile to stop the Ukrainians, but the missile fell short and hit the ground. The mission is accomplished, and the tank pulls back. The Russian anti-tank team launches another missile, but this time it gets stuck in a tree. A third attack attempt also fails. The Ukrainian tank retreats safely. Russian forces targeted and hit a Ukrainian tank during a clash. The tank caught fire, but unlike what Russian crews often do, the Ukrainian crew did not abandon the vehicle. One of the crew members took a huge risk, got out of the tank and checked the damage. He quickly grabbed a fire extinguisher and managed to put out the flames. Thanks to this, the tank returned to base and was later repaired. This brave move saved both the vehicle and the remaining crew. On the other hand, we have footage of another remarkable tank battle. At the edge of a village, a Russian tank and a Ukrainian tank face off. The Russian tank opens fire, but the shell misses its target. In response, the Ukrainian tank fires back and scores a direct hit. The impact causes the Russian tank to explode instantly and be completely destroyed. Afterwards, the Ukrainian tank leaves the area. Now let's look at the next footage. This might be one of the most striking tank duels of the entire war. One tank advances while the other lies in ambush. When the right moment comes, the second tank suddenly fires and hits the first tank with a heavy blow. As a result, the first tank is destroyed. Nowadays, the smartest tactic usually works like this. A tank takes position in bushes or wooded areas, opens fire and quickly retreats. While pulling back, it keeps its turret pointed at the enemy, staying ready to fire again. It can also hide itself with smoke while retreating. In fact, direct tank-to-tank clashes between Russian and Ukrainian forces don't happen very often, because tank duels are usually not very effective. Instead, anti-tank missiles like the Ukrainian-made Stugna produce much better results. Before the war, Ukraine began modernizing its fleet of T-64, T-72, and T-80 tanks using domestic capabilities. By adding reactive armor systems, next-generation fire control equipment, and night vision devices to these old Soviet tanks, Ukrainian armored units became more resilient against Russian armored forces. Moreover, the Leopard 2 and Abrams M1A1 tanks received from the West have shifted the balance on the battlefield in Ukraine's favor. Compared to Russian tanks, these Western models are equipped with far superior optical systems, higher accuracy, and thicker armor protection. For example, Leopard 2 tanks with their thermal cameras providing a wide field of view can detect and destroy targets even during night operations. The Abrams tanks, on the other hand, with their powerful engines and advanced electronics, can maneuver quickly across various terrains and adapt to complex offensive plans. Tanks play a critical role especially on the Donbas and Zaporizhzhia fronts. The vast open farmland in these regions allows tanks to carry out rapid maneuvers and launch sudden strikes on enemy lines. The Ukrainian army generally deploys tanks in small but highly effective units. These units rely on drones to monitor enemy positions in real time, move into suitable firing positions, strike their targets, and quickly relocate. This makes it much harder for Russian forces to respond with counter-artillery fire. Such tactics have reshaped the classic idea of tank duels into a modern style of mobile, flexible, hit-and-run warfare. In the early months of the war, Russia aimed to advance quickly into Ukrainian cities with its T-72 and T-80 tanks. However, the insufficient armor thickness and weak internal design of these tanks turned them into easy targets on the battlefield. The turret design of Russian tanks often leads to catastrophic explosions when the internal ammunition ignites, destroying the entire tank. Because of this vulnerability, Western-made Javelin missiles, or Ukraine's domestically produced Stugna anti-tank systems, have been able to neutralize Russian tanks with relative ease. Ukrainian soldiers usually coordinate these missiles with drones. A reconnaissance drone marks the target, the anti-tank team takes position, and the strike is carried out. This system has dealt a heavy blow to the conventional armored warfare tactics used by Russian forces. The psychological impact of tanks has also played a decisive role in the course of the war. Seeing Leopard and Abrams tanks in Ukrainian cities became a huge source of morale for both civilians and soldiers on the front lines. These tanks stand as a tangible symbol of the West's support for Ukraine, strengthening the people's resolve to resist. Meanwhile, Russia has also deployed newer generation tanks such as the T-90M to the front. Although the T-90M features more advanced armor and targeting systems, its limited production numbers and vulnerability to sabotage in the field have prevented it from meeting expectations. Ukrainian forces have managed to develop tactics to neutralize even these upgraded tanks. Frequently, drone-assisted ambushes have targeted the T-90Ms, forcing them to be destroyed or abandoned. In regions where tank battles are this intense, the training of tank crews is of vital importance. Ukrainian tank operators receive training from Western instructors, ensuring they can apply modern combat tactics effectively. Operating NATO standard tanks like the Leopard and Abrams requires the crew to have extensive technical knowledge. This training enables tank crews to respond correctly during sudden attacks in the field, maneuver to safe positions quickly, or seize the right moment to launch a counterstrike. Today, the Ukrainian military does not see its tanks as an independent strike force alone, but rather as an integral part of a combined arms approach. Tanks operate in close coordination with infantry units, artillery batteries, reconnaissance drones, and anti-tank teams to conduct point operations that can change the course of the war. This integration gives Ukraine a significant advantage over the more rigid and outdated armored unit doctrine inherited by the Russian army from the Soviet era. Another key role tanks play in this war is securing strategic points. Critical supply routes, bridges, and village entrances are usually defended by tanks. When enemy armored units attempt to advance, they encounter these tank defense lines and are often forced to retreat. Portable anti-tank systems deployed alongside tanks have become an inseparable part of this defense network. With the thousands of anti-tank missiles supplied by the West, Ukraine has managed to weaken Russian armored forces while keeping its own tanks operational on the front for longer periods. At the same time, this war has provided valuable insights into the future of tank technology. Many defense companies are now developing unmanned ground vehicles and remote-controlled tank prototypes. These new systems protect human crews while making it possible to deploy tanks in more dangerous zones. Ukraine has also begun directing its domestic defense industry toward this field. In the future, unmanned tanks working alongside drones and sharing real-time data could autonomously maneuver across the battlefield. The war between Ukraine and Russia has gone down in history as a conflict where front lines constantly shift and cities and villages frequently change hands. In this ever-changing landscape, tanks have become the most critical asset of mobile units. The Donbas region remains one of the bloodiest and most contested fronts of the war. Its wide, open farmlands allow tanks to maneuver swiftly but also expose them as easy targets for reconnaissance drones and anti-tank missiles. For this reason, Ukrainian tank units in Donbas usually use bushes and forested areas for concealment, inflicting heavy losses on Russian armored units with sudden ambushes before repositioning. In the battles around the cities of Donetsk and Luhansk, tanks provide direct artillery support in street fighting. Especially in urban warfare, the thick armor and powerful cannons of tanks help infantry units advance more effectively. However, narrow streets leave tanks vulnerable to anti-tank attacks. This is why the Ukrainian army always deploys tanks in cities with reconnaissance drones and infantry support. In this way, tanks are protected from ambushes, while serving as a powerful tool for clearing enemy positions. The Zaporizhzhia front has recently become the focal point of Ukraine's counteroffensive plans. Here, tank units must advance through areas filled with minefields, trenches, and deep defensive lines. Leopard 2 and Abrams tanks, thanks to their advanced suspension systems, can move swiftly even on rough terrain. Ukrainian tank crews often deploy tanks for night operations in this region. Using thermal cameras, they detect Russian defensive positions and advance simultaneously with artillery fire to open corridors. This enables infantry units to secure areas with fewer casualties. The Kharkiv region has been one of the most contested fronts since the beginning of the war. Russia's plan to advance rapidly into Kharkiv during the early months failed thanks to Ukrainian tank units defending the bridges and main roads surrounding the city. Here, tanks played a key role in protecting supply routes and cutting off Russia's logistical lines. This logistical battle demonstrated that tanks are not just offensive weapons, but also strategic defensive assets. In villages around Kharkiv, tank units concealed themselves in forests, launching sudden strikes to force Russian forces into retreat. The Kherson front is another region that highlighted the importance of tanks. Although rivers and swampy terrain limit tank movements, the Ukrainian army mainly used tanks in Kherson to defend bridgeheads. Control of Kherson holds great strategic importance as it serves as a gateway to the Black Sea. Therefore, tank units here played a decisive role both in defense and in counterattacks. At times, during river crossing operations, tanks were transported across using floating bridges to launch surprise attacks on Russian positions on the other side. The vast and diverse geography of these fronts forces tanks to perform various tasks. In one area, tanks may conduct fast assaults in open terrain, while in another, they may remain stationary for hours in forests to set up an ambush. At the heart of Ukraine's tank strategy lies flexibility. Drones have accelerated the target acquisition. Coordination with anti-tank teams has improved, and tanks now deliver greater impact with fewer losses. In the early days of the war, images of Russian tank convoys stretching for dozens of kilometers were widely covered by global media. However, these massive convoys suffered heavy losses and stalled due to Ukraine's agile anti-tank teams and drone strikes. This proved once again how vulnerable large armored convoys are in modern warfare. Ukraine turned this weakness into an advantage. Using small, dispersed but mobile tank units, it struck enemy supply lines, cut off fuel deliveries, and slowed down the advance of Russian tanks. Another critical aspect of tank warfare has been bridge and river crossing operations. Wide waterways like the Dnipro River naturally divide the front lines. The Ukrainian army stationed tanks at the front to protect bridgeheads while using explosives to sabotage river crossings and trap Russian armor. In such operations, tanks exerted heavy firepower to put pressure on the enemy and defended river crossings to hold the line. These examples from the field prove that tanks are not just weapons for direct combat, but also serve as strategic fortresses. New tank models acquired from the West have much greater long-range firing capabilities compared to old Soviet systems. This allows tanks to strike from behind the front lines rather than exposing themselves at the front. Ukrainian tanks position themselves based on coordinates provided by drones, open fire, and then relocate to evade enemy counterattacks. The prolonged duration of the war has also brought the issue of tank maintenance and repair to the forefront. With support from Western countries, Ukraine has set up tank repair workshops close to the front lines to quickly fix damaged armored vehicles. This minimizes losses and returns tanks to the battlefield swiftly. Tank crews are often rotated with backup teams to reduce fatigue and psychological strain. Altogether, Ukraine's tank doctrine is built on speed, surprise, coordination, and modern technology. Russia's heavy and conventional armored formations often find themselves helpless against these flexible and smart tactics. This dynamic structure at the front lines will become even stronger with the arrival of new Leopard, Abrams, and possibly future unmanned tank models from the West.